This programme's proud boast, first with breaking Bieber news, would be meaningless if we weren't all over his latest hairstyle. The Canadian pop star's been dividing opinion with his new do. Are these dreadlocks? If so, is that cultural appropriation, as some have claimed? Another man's hair got him into trouble on a San Francisco campus.
You're saying that I can't have a hairstyle because of your culture? Why?
Because it's my culture. You know what box means?
Do you know that it was in Egyptian culture? Are you Egyptian? Nah, Brad, you're not.
Are you Egyptian?
No, but it doesn't matter.
Wait, where's Egypt?
I have certainly been told, made aware in no uncertain terms, that hairstyles that I've had that have been deemed too black are not appropriate for that situation. So again, when you see a white person who's able to just kind of experiment with these hairstyles as though they're some sort of costume and isn't subject to any of the same stigmatization that a black person might be, it's very frustrating.
Listen up, everybody.
At this busy mixed barbershop in London this evening, the reaction to the Bieber Barnet furore seemed to be, keep your hair on.
I wish I had that amount of hair, right, Luke? I think, why not? I think if you've got hair, you can do whatever you want to do with it.
Oh, they look pretty. Yeah, I think they look nice.
Really?
Yeah, I do. I think the crossover between cultures, isn't it? Because it's predominantly known as a Afro-Caribbean type of thing.
It looks a bit more like a punk, doesn't it?
A punk?
Yeah, like...
That looks a bit punky.
Yeah, you know, it's not like neat, like Rasta or anything.
I think I've got some neater ones here.
Oh, Jesus, it doesn't look too good there.
He is copying the black style of dreads, I suppose. You could look at it like that, but he's sort of changed it up a bit. I mean, as I say, it's like Mick Hucknall and Boy George. They tried to do something like that.
And if he'd come to you for them, what would you have said?
You'll be in the chair right there. I'd actually ask one of the customers to get up and get him straight in the chair. It's Justin Bieber. He can do whatever he wants.
Stephen Smith. Well, with me in the studio is Ian Dunn, the editor of politics.co.uk, Emma Dabiri, an academic and writer, and from New York, the writer Shimon Suleiman. Good evening to you all. Shimon, first of all, there's a particular big debate in the US. Do you think Justin Bieber has done something wrong?
I think we shouldn't necessarily hold celebrities to a higher status than we should the rest of ourselves. I think the issue really is, I mean, he's allowed to do what he wants with his own hair. He's allowed to, it's his own bodily autonomy. But we have a responsibility to each other, and we have a responsibility to marginalised communities to listen to why this hurts, or if there's something that we're doing that is harmful, and what might be harmful about it, and then to make an informed decision from there.
And in your view, what is harmful?
I think there's a fine line between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. It's a fine line, but it's a line nonetheless. Appropriation, I think, there's been a lot of kind of miscommunication around what the word means at the moment.
Yeah.
It's not about necessarily enjoying someone else's cultural aesthetic, so to speak. It's about taking an aspect of something that belongs to someone else without that permission and profiting from it.
Right, let's put that to Ian Dunn. Let me put that to Ian Dunn. Particularly, it's somebody taking something from another culture, particularly a dominant culture, and taking advantage of, for example, a marginalised culture.
Yeah, I mean, like chicken tikka masala or Elvis Presley and the Blues, which basically created rock and roll, is exactly that. Because as we are, as people, we mix, and we mix culturally, and we mix artistically. And thank God that we do, because if we don't, we are functioning in an almost identical operational way to the way the far right has always asked us to in our little identity ghettos. And that seems like a rather more severe thing for us to face than Justin Bieber's haircut.
Emma, does intent matter then?
I think, to begin, I think saying that Elvis started rock and roll is typical of the type of erasure that happens when we see cultural appropriation at its finest. It's when generally a white artist is credited, and history will credit this person as being responsible for something that has been born often from black struggle and black innovation.
And you would say that about the Rolling Stones as well?
I'm not. If we're going to say that the Rolling Stones invented rock and roll, that's a problem. Yes, they've contributed to rock and roll, and they're rock and roll artists in their own right. But to say that they invented it or that they're the source of the creativity is just completely spurious, ahistorical, and inaccurate. And also, I think what's really crucial is the idea that this was framed. I think the question was, is this an insult to African culture? There was something like that. The question was talking about African culture. I think when we live in a time when African cultures, which are obviously diverse, are still kind of routinely stigmatized, presented as lesser, presented as primitive and underdeveloped, yet at the same time there's a systematic extraction of African resources, be they physical, material and cultural. That's when it steps into appropriation. Because it's not appreciation, because we don't actually appreciate African cultures when black people are participating in that cultural production.
It's only when white people then
starts to
take ownership.
Exactly.
So if we were just to put to one side, for instance, the idea whether he invented rock and roll or not, fine, to put that all to one side, was Elvis taking the blues and doing something with it, was that an act of cultural appropriation?
I think the fact that he is now known as the king of rock and roll, it speaks to the fact that a white person will always end up being credited with an innovation that has come out of black struggle and black creativity.
So it was a bad thing that happened when he took on the blues and changed it? Because most people consider that started a rich cultural heritage that we have all enjoyed over the last years.
It's not as black and white, is it good or bad?
But
it's just an erasure of the truth.
Do you accept the point that often when something is taken, and in the past because there was more power attached to the white experience, then they absolutely got the credit for it.
And we absolutely live in a racist society, and we live in an unequal and an unfair society. It's just that this is not a very sensible way of dealing with that fact.
I was going to come to you, realise that in the last... Oh, sure, no problem.
No, coming to you, I'm just going to ask you, because we asked before about appropriation. I want to turn and ask you then, what would you regard as being an act of cultural appreciation?
Cultural appreciation, I think, tends to happen a lot more organically. I grew up in London. There's a diverse community there, and often what happens is that subcultures are formed through that process, but it has to be an organic thing. I think to go back to what Emma was saying about erasure, in the last week with the debate that was happening around Corey Goldstein, who was wearing dreadlocks at a San Francisco university, there was a lot of real commitment to kind of the history behind the dreadlock. How many people wanted to mention that the Celts also wore dreadlocks, the Vikings also wore dreadlocks. And what happened in that conversation, even in that debate, was that the African American community, the black community, the Rastafarian community were completely deleted from the discussion to favour a group of people who haven't existed for the last 1,000 years.
Right.
And it's this level of erasure that we're talking about.
Well, let's talk about a different kind of erasure that you might call it, Emma. If you look at Beyonce, who got a lot of flack for taking a Bollywood theme in India as part of a Coldplay music video, was Beyonce guilty of cultural appropriation?
I think cultural appropriation isn't just about kind of taking the signifiers of a different cultural group and wearing or using them. It's actually more about power dynamics. And as far as I'm aware, there isn't such a discrepancy of power dynamics between African Americans and Indians, and there's not kind of a systematic use of Indian culture by African Americans for their own kind of material and cultural gain, in the same way that global popular culture takes and takes and takes from black culture, but black people are rarely credited for that.
So do you accept the difference, Ian Dunt, that actually if Beyonce, for example, because you were saying there's a kind of similarity in terms of power between, for example, an African American culture and an Indian culture, that actually it's okay for Beyonce to wear dreadlocks? Is that what you're essentially saying, that there is a difference?
I'm saying there's a difference because it's about power dynamics.
Do you accept that power dynamics is very important?
Well, power dynamics are important, but that doesn't mean that something is moral one way and then immoral the other. I mean, the idea should be that we are taking things from each other's cultures and that we don't try and do some kind of assessment of relative levels of discrimination there.
Is there a danger about separate? Is there a danger that this will lead to more division the more this is emphasised?
I think there is an organic exchange of cultures that happen, and that kind of contributes very much to London culture and to many manifestations of contemporary culture. But I think there's actually a far more raw and cynical use I think within popular culture, really of things that come from blackness, and bearing in mind that blackness and Africanness is still routinely subjected to this kind of concept of being like inferior and lesser than everything. And yet at the same time, everybody seems to be obsessed with the cultural output that comes from that group.
Just very briefly.
The calculation on this is that when I need to look at someone, I need to look at their race when I make an evaluation of whether they are culturally appropriating or not. And all of our lifetime of anti-racist teaching has been to look at what someone thinks rather than how they look. This runs against that.
Thank you all very much indeed.